The dust cloud rising from the horizon promised either salvation or destruction as Lillian Drake stumbled forward, her swollen feet barely lifting from the scorched earth of the Wyoming Territory. Summer 1876 had been merciless, the heat wave claiming lives across the frontier with the same casual indifference as a child swatting flies. Her canteen had run dry hours ago. The wagon she'd been traveling with abandoned after the axle broke, and the other passengers continued without her, promising to send help that never came. Lillian's vision blurred as she fixed her eyes on the distant shapes of buildings that comprised the small settlement of Lusk. Just a few more miles, she told herself, though her body screamed otherwise. The heavy carpetbag containing all her worldly possessions had grown impossibly heavier with each passing hour. Her once fine traveling dress, now torn and dust-covered, hung from her frame like a shroud. She hadn't expected the West to be so vast, so empty, so utterly indifferent to human suffering. Back in Philadelphia, the journey had seemed romantic an adventure to forge a new life after losing her parents to influenza and facing the prospect of marriage to her father's business partner, a man 3 decades her senior. When her boot caught on a rock, Lillian pitched forward. The ground rushed up to meet her, and she made no attempt to break her fall. The impact knocked what little breath remained from her lungs. She lay there, cheek pressed against the parched earth, watching a scorpion scuttle past. Even the creature seemed to mock her weakness. "I'll just rest," she whispered to no one. "Just for a moment." The rhythmic pounding of hooves barely registered until a shadow fell across her face, blocking the merciless sun. Lillian squinted upward, making out the silhouette of a man on horseback. Miss, can you hear me?" The voice sounded distant, as if traveling across a vast canyon. With tremendous effort, Lillian pushed herself onto her elbows. "I need to reach Lusk," she managed, her voice a dry rasp. "I have to keep going." The rider dismounted in a fluid motion that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. As he crouched beside her, Lillian took in his weathered face, the concerned eyes the color of a summer storm. Dust coated his clothes and wide-brimmed hat, marking him as a working man. "You're in no condition to go anywhere," he said, offering his canteen. "Drink slow now." The water was lukewarm but felt like heaven as it trickled down her parched throat. Lillian wanted to gulp it all, but the cowboy gently pulled it away. "Too much too fast will make you sick. Small sips." She nodded weakly as he assessed her condition with careful eyes. "What's your name, miss?" "Lillian Drake." She tried to rise but swayed dangerously. The cowboy steadied her with a firm hand on her shoulder. "I'm Yates O'Malley. My ranch is just over that rise. You need shade and rest before you collapse from heat exhaustion." "But I have to reach Lusk," she protested, even as her body betrayed her with violent trembling. "I have arrangements. Lusk can wait." His tone brooked no argument. "You're suffering from heat exhaustion. Another hour out here might kill you." When Lillian attempted to stand again, her legs buckled beneath her. With surprising gentleness for a man his size, Yates caught her before she hit the ground. She was too tired to keep going. The cowboy said, "Rest here as long as you need." He spoke the words softly, almost to himself, before addressing her directly. "Miss Drake, I'm offering you shelter and safety, just until you're strong enough to continue." The fight drained from Lillian as quickly as the strength had left her limbs. She managed a weak nod as Yates lifted her onto his horse with ease, securing her before mounting behind her. As they rode away from the trail, Lillian's head lolled against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat drowning out her reservations about trusting a stranger in this unforgiving land. "I don't usually," she began but couldn't finish the thought. "Out here we help those in need." Yates replied simply. "It's the only way any of us survive." The O'Malley ranch appeared before them as they crested a gentle slope, a modest but well-maintained homestead with a main house constructed of solid timber, a barn, and several outbuildings. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the summer heat, and chickens scattered as they approached. "Martha," Yates called as they neared the house. "We have a visitor in need." The door swung open, revealing an older woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. Her weathered face registered first surprise, then immediate concern. "Lord have mercy, what happened to her?" Martha hurried down the porch steps with remarkable agility for her age. "Found her collapsed on the trail to Lusk," Yates explained as he carefully dismounted, keeping a steadying hand on Lillian's waist. "Heat exhaustion, I reckon." Martha clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "Traveling alone in this heat. She's lucky you found her when you did." Lillian wanted to explain herself, to defend her decision, but her tongue felt swollen and useless in her mouth. The world tilted alarmingly as Yates lifted her from the horse. "Spare rooms made up," Martha directed. "I'll fetch cool cloths and something for her to drink." The next few hours passed in a blur for Lillian. She remembered being placed on a bed with cool sheets, Martha's gentle hands helping her out of her dust-coated traveling dress and into a simple cotton nightgown. Cool cloths pressed against her forehead, neck, and wrists. Sips of water, then a broth that tasted of chicken and herbs. When she finally awakened fully, the room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. For a disorienting moment, Lillian couldn't remember where she was or how she'd arrived there. Panic fluttered in her chest as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings, simple furnishings, a patchwork quilt, curtains that stirred in a gentle breeze coming through the open window. The door creaked open and Martha entered carrying a tray. "There you are," the older woman said with evident relief. "Gave us quite a worry, you did." Memory returned in fragments: the endless walking, the punishing heat, the cowboy on horseback. "How long have I been asleep?" Lillian's voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Better part of the day." Martha set the tray on the bedside table. "It's near sunset now. You needed the rest." Lillian struggled to sit up, suddenly aware of her state of undress. "My clothes. Being washed." "That fine dress of yours needed attention after your journey." Martha handed her a cup of tea sweetened with honey. "This will help restore your strength. There's bread and stew when you feel ready for something more substantial." Shame washed over Lillian as she accepted the tea with trembling hands. "I've imposed terribly. I don't know how to thank Mr. O'Malley and you for your kindness." Martha waved away her concerns. "Nonsense. Yates was raised right. We don't leave folks to die in the wilderness. That's not our way." She adjusted the pillows behind Lillian's back. "Now, when you're feeling steadier, perhaps you can tell us what brings a refined young woman like yourself to be walking alone toward Lusk in the dead heat of summer." Lillian stared into her tea, uncertain how much to reveal. These people were strangers, after all, despite their kindness. Yet something in Martha's direct gaze encouraged honesty. "I came west to take a teaching position in Lusk," she began. "The school board arranged my passage, but the wagon I was traveling with suffered a broken axle yesterday." The others continued on, promising to send help back for me, but she shrugged helplessly. "Left you behind, did they?" Martha's disapproval was evident. "Some folks lack basic decency." "I insisted they go," Lillian admitted. "There was a pregnant woman among them. I thought help would arrive by nightfall, and when it didn't, I decided to walk rather than wait another day." "Foolish, but brave," came a deep voice from the doorway. Lillian looked up to find Yates O'Malley filling the frame, hat in hand. He'd cleaned up since their encounter on the trail, his dark hair still damp from washing, his face clean-shaven. Without the layer of trail dust, she could better appreciate his features: strong jaw, straight nose, eyes that seemed to hold more years of experience than his age would suggest. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, remaining in the doorway. "I wanted to see how our guest was faring." "Mr. O'Malley," Lillian acknowledged, suddenly very aware of her disheveled appearance. "I owe you my life." A hint of color touched his cheeks. Anyone would have done the same. "Not anyone," Martha corrected, rising from her seat beside the bed. "Now that I know Miss Drake is awake and coherent, I'll fetch that stew. You both must be starving." She bustled out, patting Yates's arm as she passed. An awkward silence settled between them. Lillian clutched the quilt closer, though she was modestly covered by the nightgown. "Your aunt is very kind," she finally said. "Martha isn't my aunt," Yates corrected, a smile softening his features. "She's been our housekeeper since before my father died." "More family than employee, truth be told." "I see." Lillian took another sip of tea. "This is your family's ranch, then?" Yates nodded, taking a cautious step into the room but maintaining a respectful distance. "3 generations of O'Malleys have worked this land. My grandfather staked his claim in '44, built the house with his own hands. My father expanded the operation, and now it's mine." "It seems a fine place," Lillian offered, though she had seen little of it. "It's modest compared to some, but it's good land with reliable water." Pride colored his voice. "We run about 200 head of cattle, keep horses, grow enough to feed ourselves through winter." Another silence fell, less awkward than the first. Lillian found herself studying the man who had rescued her, not much older than her 22 years, perhaps 26 or 27, but with the weathered look of someone who lived his life outdoors. "The school in Lusk is expecting you?" Yates asked. "Yes, I'm contracted to start when the term begins next month." Lillian hesitated. "I should send word that I'm delayed." "I'll ride into town tomorrow," Yates offered. "I can deliver a message to the school board." Relief washed over her. "That's extraordinarily kind of you, Mr. O'Malley." "Yates, please." He shifted his hat in his hands. "Mr. O'Malley was my father." Before she could respond, Martha returned with a steaming bowl of stew and a thick slice of bread. "You can continue your conversation over supper," she announced. "Miss Drake needs to build her strength, and you need to wash up properly, Yates. Don't think I didn't notice you only splashed water on your face." Yates grinned, a transformation that lightened his entire countenance. "Yes, madam," he replied, giving Lillian a conspiratorial wink before retreating. After he left, Martha helped Lillian to a more comfortable sitting position and placed the tray across her lap. "Eat while it's hot," she instructed. "And don't you worry about Yates. He may look rough around the edges, but he's got a gentle heart. His mother would be proud of the man he's become." As Lillian ate the simple but delicious stew, she found herself wondering about the family dynamics of the O'Malley ranch: the absent parents, the devoted housekeeper, and the young man who ran it all with quiet competence. How long has Yates been managing the ranch alone? She asked between mouthfuls. Martha settled into the chair beside the bed. "His father passed 3 years ago. Heart gave out while breaking a new horse. His mother's been gone much longer, died of fever when Yates was just 14. He's been the man of the house since he was barely more than a boy." "That's a heavy burden to carry so young." "He's carried it well," Martha said with evident pride. "Never complained, never shirked his duty, works from sunup past sundown most days." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Truth be told, I worry about him. A man needs more than work to fill his life." Lillian felt her cheeks warm at the implied suggestion. "I'm merely passing through, Martha. Once I've recovered, I must continue to Lusk. I've given my word to the school board." "Of course, dear," Martha patted her hand. I'm not suggesting otherwise. Just making conversation. But the twinkle in her eye suggested more. By the following morning, Lillian felt considerably stronger. She woke to find her traveling dress cleaned, pressed, and hanging from a peg on the wall. A basin of fresh water waited on the washstand, along with a bar of homemade soap that smelled of lavender and a clean towel. After washing and dressing, she made her way cautiously downstairs, following the scent of coffee and bacon. The main room of the house was larger than it had appeared from outside, an open space combining kitchen and living areas, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. Bookshelves lined another, surprisingly well stocked for a frontier home. Martha stood at the cast-iron stove, turning bacon in a skillet. She looked up at Lillian's approach and beamed. "Look at you. A vast improvement from yesterday. How are you feeling, child?" "Much better, thank you." Lillian moved toward the stove. "Please let me help with breakfast." "I've imposed enough already." "Nonsense. You sit right down. You're still recovering." Martha pointed to the table with her spatula. "Coffee's hot if you want some." Lillian acquiesced, sinking into a chair at the sturdy oak table. She poured herself coffee from the pot in the center, adding a splash of cream from a small pitcher. "Is Yates already out working?" she asked, noting his absence. "Been up since before dawn," Martha confirmed, transferring bacon to a platter. "He's seeing to the cattle in the north pasture, but he'll be back for breakfast. Never misses a meal, that boy." As if summoned by her words, the door swung open and Yates entered, bringing with him the sense of fresh air, horses, and hard work. He removed his hat upon seeing Lillian at the table. "Miss Drake," he greeted her, genuine pleasure warming his voice. "You're looking much improved this morning." "Thanks to the care I've received," she replied, strangely flustered by his direct gaze. "And please call me Lillian." He nodded, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Lillian, then." Martha interrupted their exchange by placing heaping plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits on the table. "Eat up, both of you. Growing bodies need fuel." "I stopped growing years ago, Martha," Yates protested with a laugh, taking his seat opposite Lillian. "Your grandmother always said a man's not done growing until he's in his grave," Martha retorted. "Now eat." Breakfast passed in comfortable conversation. Yates described the ranch operations with quiet pride, answering Lillian's questions about cattle raising with patience. In turn, she spoke of her teaching experience limited to a year as an assistant in a Philadelphia girls' school, but enough to secure the position in Lusk. "The town's growing fast," Yates told her between bites. "The railroad survey crew came through last spring. Once the tracks are laid, Lusk will boom even more." "That's partly why they are expanding the school," Lillian explained. "They're expecting an influx of families once the railroad connection is complete." "You've chosen an interesting time to come west," he observed. "Lots of change coming to these parts." After breakfast, Yates offered to show Lillian around the ranch before he rode into town. Despite Martha's concerns that it might be too much exertion, Lillian insisted she felt strong enough for a short tour. "Just don't let her overdo it," Martha warned Yates as they left the house. The morning air carried the promise of another scorching day, but for now, it remained pleasantly warm. Yates guided Lillian at a leisurely pace, pointing out the barn, the corral where several horses grazed, the smokehouse, and the vegetable garden Martha tended with religious devotion. "It's more beautiful than I expected," Lillian admitted, taking in the vista of rolling grassland stretching toward distant hills. When people described Wyoming Territory, they mentioned the harsh winters and the difficult conditions. No one spoke of the beauty. "Most folks are too busy surviving to notice," Yates replied. "But yes, it has its own kind of beauty." He gestured toward a grove of cottonwoods marking a creek bed. "Water makes all the difference out here. We're fortunate to have a reliable source year-round." They walked in companionable silence toward the corral, where a magnificent black stallion approached the fence, nickering softly. "That's Thunder," Yates said with obvious affection, reaching out to stroke the horse's velvety muzzle. "Raised him from a colt, best cutting horse in 3 counties." The stallion butted his head against Yates's chest in a gesture of familiarity and trust. Without thinking, Lillian extended her hand toward the animal. "May I?" "Careful," Yates cautioned. "He's particular about strangers." But to his evident surprise, Thunder stretched his neck to sniff Lillian's palm, then allowed her to stroke his nose. "Well, I'll be," Yates murmured. "He must sense something special in you. Took him months to let Martha touch him." Lillian smiled, delighted by the connection. "I've always loved horses. My father kept a pair for our carriage in Philadelphia, though nothing as magnificent as Thunder." "You ride?" Yates asked, interest sparking in his eyes. "Some, though it's been years." "Young ladies in Philadelphia aren't encouraged to ride for pleasure once they reach a certain age." A pang of longing touched her heart. "I miss it. Perhaps, if you're feeling stronger tomorrow, we could go for a short ride." The offer came hesitantly, as if Yates feared overstepping. "I have a gentle mare who'd suit you well." The prospect brightened Lillian's spirits immeasurably. "I'd like that very much," she said, then hastily added, "if Martha thinks I'm well enough, of course." Yates's smile transformed his face again, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "I'll make sure to get her blessing first." They continued their tour, Yates pointing out various aspects of the ranch operation with evident pride. When they reached the small family cemetery on a gentle rise overlooking the property, he grew quieter. 3 markers stood within the neat picket fence: Andrew O'Malley, 1802–1870, Sarah O'Malley, 1805–1864, and Catherine O'Malley, 1845–1863. "Your parents?" Lillian asked softly, nodding toward the newer graves. "My father and mother," Yates confirmed, removing his hat. "And my sister Catherine. She caught scarlet fever when she was 18. Mother never really recovered from losing her, followed less than a year later." "I'm so sorry." Lillian understood the pain of such loss all too well. "My own parents died within weeks of each other last winter. Influenza." Yates met her eyes, recognition of shared grief passing between them. "It leaves a hole nothing seems to fill," he said quietly. "Yes," she agreed, unexpected tears pricking her eyes. "Exactly that." They stood in silence for a moment before Yates gently suggested they return to the house. The sun had climbed higher and the heat was building. "I should write that note for you to take to the school board," Lillian said as they walked back. "No need to rush," Yates replied. "I've some repairs to finish before I head to town. And truthfully, you should rest another day or two before attempting the journey to Lusk." Though her practical nature urged her to continue her journey as soon as possible, Lillian found herself nodding in agreement. "Perhaps you're right. I wouldn't want to risk collapsing again." Back at the house, Martha fussed over Lillian, insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day. After writing a brief note to the Lusk school board explaining her delay, Lillian retreated to her room with a book borrowed from Yates's surprisingly extensive library, a volume of Wordsworth's poetry she hadn't expected to find in a Wyoming ranch house. "It was my mother's," Yates explained when she commented on the collection. "She was a schoolteacher before she married my father, brought her books with her from Boston and added to them whenever possible." "She must have been a remarkable woman," Lillian said, touched by this connection to his past. "She was," he agreed simply, something in his expression suggesting he saw echoes of his mother in Lillian's own love of literature. The afternoon passed peacefully as Lillian alternated between reading and dozing. By the time Yates returned from town, the worst heat of the day had passed, and she felt refreshed enough to join him and Martha for an early supper. "The school board sends their regards," Yates announced as they ate. "They're relieved you're safe and said to take whatever time you need to recover. Term doesn't start for another 3 weeks, so there's no rush." Relief washed over Lillian. "That's welcome news. I was concerned they might give the position to someone else if I delayed too long." "Not likely," Yates said with a slight smile. "According to Mr. Peterson, the board chairman, they've been trying to fill the position for months. Qualified teachers aren't exactly flocking to Wyoming Territory." Martha snorted. "Can't imagine why. What young woman wouldn't want to live in a half-built town surrounded by sage and rattlesnakes?" "Martha," Yates admonished, but Lillian laughed. "It's a fair question," she admitted. "I sometimes wonder myself what I was thinking, accepting a position so far from everything familiar." "What did bring you all this way?" Yates asked. "If you don't mind my asking." Lillian hesitated, then decided honesty was the simplest approach. "After my parents died, I found our financial situation was precarious. My father had made some unfortunate investments. The house and most possessions had to be sold to cover debts." Martha clucked sympathetically. "My father's business partner offered marriage as a solution," Lillian continued, her voice tightening at the memory. "He was 53 to my 22, but he considered it a most generous offer." "And you didn't," Yates observed. "No." Lillian met his gaze steadily. "I had my teaching certificate and enough independence of spirit to believe I could make my own way. When I saw the advertisement for a position in Lusk, offering room and board plus a modest salary, it seemed providential." "Brave," Martha declared. "Foolhardy, perhaps, but brave nonetheless." "Sometimes the two are indistinguishable," Yates said quietly, his eyes still on Lillian's face. After supper, they moved to the porch to enjoy the cooler evening air. Martha brought coffee, then excused herself to finish some mending, leaving Lillian and Yates alone as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in spectacular hues. "You miss Philadelphia?" Yates asked after they had sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Lillian considered the question seriously. "I miss certain aspects, the libraries, the concerts, the familiarity of it all. But even before my parents died, I sometimes felt constrained by the expectations placed on women of my social circle. And those expectations didn't include teaching in a frontier town. Definitely not." She smiled, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "My mother's friends were scandalized when I obtained my teaching certificate. They considered it barely a step above domestic service." Yates shook his head. "Out here, a good teacher is respected. You'll find Lusk values education more than you might expect." "That's encouraging." Lillian sipped her coffee. "And what about you, Yates? Have you always known this would be your life?" "I've never wanted anything else," he answered without hesitation. "This land, these animals there in my blood, I can't imagine any other life." He paused, then added more softly, "Though I'll admit, there are times the solitude weighs heavily." The admission hung between them, creating an intimacy neither had anticipated. Lillian found herself studying his profile in the fading light, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "It must be difficult," she said at last, "carrying such responsibility alone." "I'm not entirely alone. I have Martha and a few good men who help with the cattle." Yates turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the last golden light of day. "But yes, there are times I wish for." He trailed off, seemingly unable to articulate the absence he felt. "A partner," Lillian supplied gently. Someone to share both burdens and joys. Exactly that, he agreed, something shifting in his expression as he looked at her, a recognition, perhaps, or a possibility neither had considered before. The moment stretched between them until Martha's voice called from inside, breaking the spell. "Yates, can you bring in more firewood before full dark?" He rose reluctantly. "Duty calls," he said with a small smile. "Rest well, Lillian. Tomorrow we'll see if you're up for that ride I promised." Left alone on the porch, Lillian watched the first stars appear in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Something unexpected had happened in that quiet moment with Yates, a connection that had nothing to do with her rescue or his hospitality. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she felt a flicker of possibility that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with living. The next morning dawned cooler, with a gentle breeze that promised a respite from the punishing heat. Lillian woke feeling fully restored, eager for the promised horseback ride. After a hearty breakfast, during which Martha gave reluctant approval for a short, gentle ride, no galloping, mind you, Yates led Lillian to the barn. "This is Willow," he said, introducing a dapple gray mare with gentle eyes. "She's steady and sweet-tempered, perfect for someone getting back in the saddle after a long absence." Lillian approached the mare, allowing her to sniff her hand before stroking the velvety muzzle. "She's beautiful," she said, genuine admiration in her voice. "She was my mother's favorite," Yates said, beginning to saddle the horse with practiced movements. "Hasn't been ridden as much as she should be these past few years." "I'm honored you'd trust me with her," Lillian replied, touched by the gesture. Once both Willow and Thunder were saddled, Yates helped Lillian mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, and from the slight flush on Yates's cheeks as he stepped back, she suspected he'd felt something similar. "Remember, take it easy," he cautioned as he swung effortlessly onto Thunder's back. "Your body is still recovering." They rode at a leisurely pace, following a well-worn trail that wound through meadows dotted with wildflowers, before climbing gradually toward a ridge overlooking the ranch. Lillian's initial nervousness faded quickly as her body remembered the rhythm of horseback riding. By the time they reached the summit, she felt as though she'd been riding Willow for years. "You're a natural," Yates observed as they dismounted to rest the horses. "Are you sure it's been years since you've ridden?" Lillian laughed, feeling a freedom she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. "Quite sure, but it feels wonderful to be in the saddle again." They secured the horses to a nearby tree and walked to the edge of the ridge. The view was spectacular. The O'Malley ranch spread below them, cattle grazing in the distance, the ribbon of the creek winding through the property, and beyond, the vast expanse of the Wyoming plains stretching toward distant mountains. "It's breathtaking," Lillian said softly. "This was my father's favorite spot," Yates told her, standing close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "He used to say you could see heaven from here. I can understand why." She turned to look at him, struck again by the quiet strength in his features. "Thank you for sharing this with me." "I've never brought anyone else here," he admitted, his voice low. "It's always felt too personal." The significance of his words wasn't lost on Lillian. Something was growing between them, something unexpected and potentially life-changing. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it filled her with a warm certainty. "Why me?" she asked softly. Yates met her gaze, the usual reserve in his eyes replaced by vulnerability. "I don't rightly know," he answered honestly. "Except that from the moment I found you on that trail, something told me you were different, important." His directness touched her deeply. In Philadelphia, men spoke in circumlocutions and veiled meanings. Yates's straightforward admission of his feelings was as refreshing as it was disarming. "I've felt it too," she confessed. "This connection, I can't explain it." "Perhaps we don't need to explain it," Yates suggested, reaching out to touch her cheek with a gentleness that belied his calloused hands. "Perhaps we can simply acknowledge it exists." Lillian leaned almost imperceptibly into his touch. "What happens when I leave for Lusk?" The question hung between them, unavoidable and weighted with implications neither was ready to fully address. "Lusk is only 15 miles away," Yates said after a moment. "Not such a great distance." "No," she agreed, hope kindling in her chest. "Not so great at all." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching a pair of eagles soar on thermal currents above the valley. When Yates's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally, it felt like the most normal thing in the world. The days that followed established a pattern. Mornings were devoted to ranch work for Yates, while Lillian helped Martha with household tasks, learning the rhythms of frontier life. Afternoons often included riding lessons, with Lillian growing more confident in the saddle each day. Evenings were spent on the porch or by the fire, depending on the weather, sharing stories and gradually revealing themselves to each other. Lillian learned that Yates had a dry wit that emerged when he was most comfortable, that he read voraciously during the winter months when ranch work slowed, that he played the harmonica with surprising skill. In turn, she shared her love of poetry, her talent for sketching, and her dreams of someday writing stories of her own. A week passed, then another. Though Lillian knew she would soon need to continue to Lusk to prepare for the school term, neither she nor Yates spoke directly of her departure. Instead, they lived in a suspended moment, allowing their connection to deepen without forcing definitions or commitments. Martha watched their growing attachment with quiet approval, though she occasionally reminded them both that proper courtship requires proper boundaries. Despite her admonitions, she contrived to give them private moments together, suddenly remembering tasks that required her immediate attention elsewhere whenever conversation between them grew particularly intimate. On a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks after Lillian's rescue, they rode to a secluded bend in the creek where cottonwoods provided shade and privacy. Martha had packed them a picnic cold chicken, fresh bread, apple preserves, and a jug of lemonade with instructions not to return until supper time. "I think she's matchmaking," Lillian observed with a smile as they spread a blanket on the soft grass beside the water. "Martha," Yates feigned innocence, "she'd never be so presumptuous." "Of course not," Lillian agreed, playing along, "merely ensuring we have adequate sustenance for our ride." They laughed together, the ease between them a testament to how far they'd come in such a short time. As they ate, they watched the play of sunlight through leaves, listened to the gentle gurgle of the creek, and continued the conversation that had been unfolding between them for weeks. "I should leave for Lusk soon," Lillian said finally, giving voice to the reality they'd both been avoiding. "The term starts in 5 days. Yates nodded, his expression somber. "I know. I've been trying not to think about it." "Martha offered to help me prepare my things tomorrow," she continued, studying his face for his reaction. "I thought perhaps you might accompany me to town the following day." "Of course," he agreed immediately. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Lillian took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Yates, these past weeks have been, I don't know how to describe them. Transformative, perhaps. For me as well," he said, reaching for her hand. "I never expected to find someone like you, Lillian, especially not collapsed on the trail to Lusk." His attempt at humor couldn't quite mask the emotion in his voice. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing her question from their first ride together. "When I go to Lusk." Yates was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on the back of her hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and certain. "I'd like to court you properly," he said. "With your permission, I'd ride into Lusk regularly. We could exchange letters between visits, and perhaps when you have school holidays, you might return to the ranch." Joy bloomed in Lillian's chest, but practicality compelled her to consider the obstacles. The school board expects teachers to maintain certain standards of behavior. A single woman being courted might raise eyebrows in a small town like Lusk. "Then we'll be discreet," Yates promised. "But I won't pretend not to care for you, Lillian. These weeks have shown me what's possible between two people who respect and understand each other. I don't want to lose that chance because of small-town gossip." His words resonated with her own feelings. After the constraints of Philadelphia society, Lillian had come west seeking independence and purpose. She hadn't expected to find someone who would encourage rather than limit her aspirations. "There will be challenges," she warned, though her heart had already decided. "There always are," Yates replied simply, "but we'll face them together." The promise in those words moved Lillian deeply. Without conscious thought, she leaned toward him, closing the distance between them. Yates met her halfway, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with undeniable passion. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and Lillian found herself responding with a fervor that surprised them both. When they finally separated, both somewhat breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he confessed. "I've been hoping you would," Lillian admitted, a blush coloring her cheeks. They spent the remainder of the afternoon by the creek, alternating between conversation and increasingly bold displays of affection. By the time they returned to the ranch, the sun setting behind them, an unspoken understanding existed between them whatever the future held. They would face it as a pair, not as individuals. Martha took one look at their clasped hands and radiant faces and nodded with satisfaction. "About time," she declared, turning back to her cooking. "Supper's nearly ready. Wash up, both of you." The following day was filled with preparations for Lillian's departure. Martha helped her launder and press her few garments, while Yates rode to a neighboring ranch to borrow a suitable wagon for the journey to Lusk. Though melancholy touched their interactions, an underlying current of excitement and possibility kept their spirits buoyant. That evening after supper, as they sat together on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass, Yates presented Lillian with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised by the unexpected gift. "Open it," he encouraged, an unusual nervousness in his manner. Lillian carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with a delicate pattern of wildflowers. "It was my mother's," Yates explained. "She used to write in it daily observations about nature, bits of poetry, thoughts about her day. I thought you might like to continue the tradition." Tears pricked Lillian's eyes as she ran her fingers over the intricate design. "Yates, I can't accept this. It's a family heirloom." "I'm hoping," he said quietly, his eyes holding hers, "that someday you might be family too." The implication of his words stole her breath. Though they had acknowledged their feelings for each other, neither had spoken so directly of a future together. "It's too soon," she protested weakly, even as her heart leaped at the possibility. "We've known each other barely a month." "My parents knew each other 1 week before my father proposed," Yates countered. "Out here, people don't waste time when they find what matters. And you think I matter?" Lillian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you do." He took her hands in his, the journal cradled between them. "I'm not proposing today, Lillian. I understand you need time and we have much to learn about each other, but I want you to know where my heart is heading." Overwhelmed by emotion, Lillian leaned forward to kiss him, pouring into the gesture all the feelings she couldn't yet put into words. When they parted, she clutched the journal to her chest. "I'll treasure it," she promised, "and I'll write to you every day." Their journey to Lusk the next morning began at dawn, with Martha providing them a hearty breakfast and a basket of provisions for the road. The older woman embraced Lillian with unexpected strength. "You come back and visit soon, you hear," she insisted, her eyes suspiciously bright. "This place needs a woman's touch besides my old hands." "I will," Lillian promised, touched by the affection that had grown between them. The 15-mile journey to Lusk took most of the day, as the wagon moved slower than horseback travel. Yates and Lillian made the most of their time together, planning when they would next see each other, and discussing her upcoming teaching responsibilities. By mutual agreement, they avoided any mention of longer-term arrangements, content for now with the understanding that their relationship would continue despite the separation. Lusk proved to be exactly as Yates had described, a growing frontier town with aspirations beyond its current size. The main street featured a general store, saloon, bank, small hotel, and various other businesses necessary for a functioning community. Construction was underway on several new buildings, evidence of the anticipated boom once the railroad arrived. They stopped first at the schoolhouse, a modest but well-built structure at the edge of town. Mr. Peterson, the school board chairman, happened to be there overseeing the delivery of new desks. He greeted Lillian warmly, expressing relief at her safe arrival and showing her around the building that would soon be her domain. "Teachers' quarters are just behind," he explained, leading them to a small but tidy cabin attached to the rear of the schoolhouse. "Basic accommodations, but comfortable enough. The ladies' auxiliary stocked the pantry for you, and there's firewood split and stacked for the first month. After that, the older boys take turns with the chores." "It's perfect," Lillian said sincerely, taking in the simple furnishings: a bed, table and chairs, bookshelf, and cookstove. "More than I expected." Mr. Peterson beamed with pride. "We take care of our teachers in Lusk. Town's growing, and we need educated young folks if we're going to prosper." He glanced curiously at Yates. "And you are, sir?" "Yates O'Malley," he replied, extending his hand. "My ranch is about 15 miles southwest. Miss Drake suffered heat exhaustion on her journey here, and I was fortunate enough to find her and offer assistance until she recovered." "Well, we're much obliged to you, Mr. O'Malley," Peterson said, shaking his hand vigorously. "Wouldn't do to lose our teacher before term even starts." After Peterson departed, Lillian and Yates unloaded her belongings from the wagon. The task was quickly completed. She traveled light, with just her carpetbag and a small trunk containing books and personal items. When the last box was placed inside the cabin, they stood facing each other, the moment of parting upon them. "Will you be all right?" Yates asked, concern evident in his expression. "I don't like leaving you alone your first night here." "I'll be fine," Lillian assured him, though she felt a pang at the thought of his departure. Mr. Peterson said Mrs. Caldwell from the general store would stop by this evening to see if I need anything, and I should begin making my own way in the community. Yates nodded reluctantly. "You're right, of course. I just—" He trailed off, then pulled her into his arms, propriety forgotten in the privacy of her new home. "I've grown accustomed to seeing you every day." Lillian returned his embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. "As have I, but we knew this moment would come." "I'll return on Sunday," he promised. "Sooner if you need me for any reason. Just send word with the stage driver. He passes the ranch road daily." "Sunday," she agreed, rising on tiptoes to kiss him one last time. "I'll look forward to it." Their parting was bittersweet, tempered by the promise of reunion. As Lillian watched Yates drive the wagon down the main street of Lusk, she felt a curious mixture of sadness and anticipation. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since her parents' deaths, she felt she wasn't walking it entirely alone. True to Mr. Peterson's word, Mrs. Caldwell arrived that evening with a hot meal and welcome gossip about the town and its inhabitants. Though clearly curious about Lillian's relationship with Yates O'Malley, such a handsome, prosperous young rancher, and still unmarried at 27, she was too well-mannered to pry directly. The following days were filled with preparations for the school term. Lillian organized supplies, familiarized herself with the curriculum materials left by the previous teacher, and met many of her future students as parents brought them to introduce themselves. By the time Sunday arrived, she felt reasonably well established in her new role and community. Yates arrived shortly after church services ended, looking so handsome in his Sunday best that Lillian's heart skipped when she spotted him tying his horse outside her cabin. They spent a pleasant afternoon walking around the outskirts of town, maintaining a respectable distance in public, while stealing moments of privacy to exchange more intimate words and touches. Before he departed, Yates presented her with another gift, a small silver whistle on a chain. "If you ever need help and I'm not here," he explained, "blow this 3 times. It carries for nearly a mile. Someone will come." Though Lillian doubted she would need such dramatic means of summoning assistance in the small, friendly community of Lusk, she was touched by his concern for her safety. She allowed him to place the chain around her neck, the whistle resting just below her collarbones like a talisman. The school term began the following day with 28 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Lillian quickly discovered that teaching in a one-room schoolhouse required far different skills than she had developed in Philadelphia's structured environment. Here, she needed to simultaneously instruct beginners in their letters while challenging older students with algebra and Latin. The work was exhausting but deeply satisfying. True to his word, Yates visited every Sunday. Their courtship progressed with the steady rhythm of changing seasons, cautious at first, with proper chaperoning when necessary, gradually growing more assured as the community accepted their relationship. Mrs. Caldwell and other town matrons initially watched with skeptical eyes, but Yates's consistent respect for Lillian's position and reputation eventually won their approval. Letters flew back and forth between Sundays, Lillian writing in the journal Yates had given her, carefully tearing out pages to send with the stage driver. Yates responding with surprisingly eloquent accounts of ranch life and his growing feelings for her. Martha added occasional notes of her own, usually including practical advice about frontier housekeeping or pointed observations about Yates's improved mood since Lillian had entered his life. When the first snowfall of the season arrived in early November, Lillian experienced a moment of panic. Winter in Wyoming was notoriously harsh, and the prospect of Yates being unable to visit for weeks or months weighed heavily on her heart. He addressed her concerns during his next visit, arriving with a sturdy sleigh instead of his usual mount. "Snow won't keep me from you," he promised as they huddled under buffalo robes during a short ride outside town, though there might be some Sundays when the drifts are too deep for even the sleigh. "On those days, you'll have to content yourself with knowing I'm thinking of you." "As I'll be thinking of you," she replied, snuggling closer against the winter chill. Christmas brought a week-long school holiday and Lillian's first extended visit back to the O'Malley Ranch since her departure for Lusk. Martha welcomed her with open arms and a home decorated with pine boughs, red ribbons, and handmade ornaments. This place hasn't seen proper Christmas cheer since Catherine died, the older woman confided as they prepared Christmas Eve dinner. Having you here brings life back to these old walls. Yates had been uncharacteristically nervous all day, disappearing for hours to attend to mysterious errands. When he finally joined them for the evening meal, his usual calm seemed restored, though an undercurrent of excitement remained visible to those who knew him well. After dinner, they gathered by the fireplace to exchange gifts. Martha received a fine woolen shawl from Lillian and a new rocking chair from Yates. Lillian opened Martha's gift to find a beautiful quilt pieced from scraps of fabrics with special significance to the O'Malley family. "Every square tells a story," Martha explained. "That blue was from Catherine's graduation dress. The red calico was Sarah's favorite apron. The homespun was from Andrew's first shirt when they arrived in Wyoming. It's priceless," Lillian whispered, deeply moved by the gesture of inclusion. "Thank you." Yates's gift to her was a small package that rattled curiously when she shook it. Inside the box, she found a simple iron key. "It's to the front door," he explained as confusion crossed her features. "This house, my home." He took her hands in his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "Lillian Drake, I'm asking you to make it your home too, to be my wife." Though she had anticipated this moment might come, the reality of it stole her breath. Martha slipped quietly from the room, leaving them alone by the fire's warm glow. "I love you," Yates continued when Lillian remained speechless. "I've loved you since that first day when you were too tired to keep going and I told you to rest as long as you needed. I think I somehow knew even then that you were the one I'd been waiting for." Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Yates O'Malley." Joy transformed his features as he swept her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of both present happiness and future promises. When they finally separated, breathless and laughing, he reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet pouch. "It was my grandmother's," he said, drawing out a gold band set with a modest diamond flanked by 2 small sapphires. "My grandfather bought it from a jeweler in St. Louis and carried it 2,000 miles to give to her." As Yates slipped the ring onto her finger, Lillian felt the weight of history and hope combined. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Everything is perfect." Martha returned with glasses of her special blackberry cordial to toast their engagement. As they discussed potential wedding dates, practical considerations arose. Lillian was contracted to teach until the end of the school year in May. "We could marry in June," she suggested. "After my teaching obligations are fulfilled." "June is ideal for a wedding," Martha agreed enthusiastically. "The wildflowers will be blooming and we can host the celebration here at the ranch." Yates, however, seemed reluctant to wait so long. "What about Easter break?" he countered. "You have a week off from school then, don't you?" "Yates O'Malley," Martha exclaimed. "A proper wedding takes months to plan. You can't rush these things." "I don't need anything elaborate," Lillian interjected, squeezing Yates's hand. "But Martha's right, there are preparations to make, and I'd prefer not to rush. June would give us time to do things properly." Though clearly impatient, Yates eventually conceded to the wisdom of waiting. "June it is," he agreed, "but not a day later." The remainder of the school year passed in a flurry of activity. Between her teaching duties and wedding preparations, Lillian scarcely had a moment to herself. The women of Lusk rallied around her, offering assistance with her trousseau and wedding plans. Mrs. Caldwell organized a quilting bee to create a wedding ring quilt as a community gift. Mr. Peterson arranged for a new teacher to take over in the fall, assuring Lillian that her position would be waiting if she ever wished to return. "Though I suspect," he added with a knowing smile, that you'll be quite busy with ranch life and starting a family. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, the Wyoming landscape resplendent in early summer glory. The ceremony itself was held in the meadow near the O'Malley family cemetery, a location that initially struck some guests as morbid, but proved to be profoundly meaningful. As Reverend Williams from the Lusk Church later commented, "It was as if the generations of O'Malley's past were giving their blessing to this new beginning." Lillian wore a gown of ivory silk sent from Philadelphia by a childhood friend, modified by Martha's skilled hands to suit frontier practicality without sacrificing elegance. Wildflowers from the ridge where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other formed her bouquet and crown. Yates, standing beneath an arch constructed by neighboring ranchers and decorated with Martha's roses, watched with undisguised adoration as Lillian approached on Mr. Peterson's arm. Their vows, written together during the long winter evenings of their courtship, spoke of partnership, respect, and enduring love. When Reverend Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the assembled guests, a mixture of Lusk townspeople and ranching families from miles around, seemed to echo across the vast Wyoming plains. The celebration continued well into the night, with feasting, dancing, and more than a few emotional toasts to the new couple. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the yard, creating a magical glow that matched the joy in Lillian's heart. "Happy, Mrs. O'Malley," Yates whispered as they swayed together to the music of a fiddle played by one of the neighboring ranchers. "Completely," she assured him, the name still new and wondrous on her ears. "Though I can scarcely believe we've come so far from that first day on the trail to Lusk." "I knew then," he confessed, pulling her closer. "When I saw you struggling forward despite your exhaustion, I recognized something in you that matched something in me, a determination, a refusal to surrender. And yet," she reminded him with a smile, "you told me to rest as long as I needed." "Sometimes," Yates said, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that still took her breath away, "the strongest thing we can do is accept help when it's offered." "A lesson I'm grateful to have learned," Lillian acknowledged, rising on tiptoes to kiss him, heedless of the knowing glances and good-natured whispers their display provoked among the guests. Later that night, when the last visitors had departed and Martha had retired to her room, Yates carried Lillian across the threshold of the home that was now truly theirs. Their union, blessed by community and consecrated in private, marked the beginning of a partnership that would weather the challenges of frontier life with the same strength and grace that had characterized their courtship. In the years that followed, the O'Malley Ranch prospered under their combined care. Yates's knowledge of cattle and horses complemented Lillian's organizational skills and business acumen. Together they weathered drought seasons and harsh winters, celebrating the good years and supporting each other through the difficult ones. Lillian continued to teach, though in a different capacity than she had originally planned. Rather than returning to the Lusk schoolhouse, she established a small school on the ranch for their own children and those of their ranch hands. The O'Malley School, as it came to be known, gained a reputation for excellence that drew students from neighboring ranches and even from Lusk itself. Their first child, a son they named Andrew after Yates's father, arrived 11 months after their wedding. Healthy and strong-willed from birth, he grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's affinity for the land and his mother's love of learning. 3 years later, twin girls Sarah and Catherine, named for the grandmothers they would never meet, completed their family. Martha remained with them, ostensibly as housekeeper but in reality as beloved grandmother to the children and trusted advisor to both Yates and Lillian. Even as age slowed her steps, her mind remained sharp and her affection unwavering. When she passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, with Lillian holding one hand and Yates the other, they mourned her as the heart of their family. The railroad finally reached Lusk in 1886, bringing the promised boom in population and commerce. The O'Malley Ranch adapted to changing times, diversifying into breeding horses for the cavalry and later automobiles when that revolution arrived. Through it all, the foundation laid in those early days of their marriage mutual respect, shared purpose, and abiding love sustained them. On warm summer evenings, long after their children were grown with families of their own, Yates and Lillian could often be found on the porch swing he had built as a fifth anniversary gift. Sometimes they spoke of the day's events or plans for the future. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the sun set behind the distant hills. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked on one such evening, nearly 4 decades after their wedding. "Staying here instead of returning east or pursuing your teaching career more formally?" Lillian considered the question seriously, as was her nature. "Not for a moment," she answered finally. "My life has been richer, more challenging, and more fulfilling than I could have imagined that day when I was too tired to continue, and a handsome cowboy told me to rest as long as I needed." Yates squeezed her hand, the gesture as meaningful now as it had been in their youth. "Best words I ever spoke," he said with the quiet certainty that had been his hallmark throughout their years together. "And the wisest decision I ever made was to listen," Lillian replied, resting her head against his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. In that moment, as in countless others throughout their shared life, both recognized the profound truth that had guided their journey from strangers to soulmates. Sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most extraordinary destinies, if only we have the courage to follow where they lead.